Hey folks, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Super excited to be here. My name is Jonathan Strauss. I'm the field CTO at SBU Consulting. Been part of the TBM ecosystem since 2015, actually. Time really flies. I've been advising technology and finance leaders on how to optimize their technology investments and maximize value for years. Joined ECI last summer and have been super excited to partner with them, bringing some of that thought partner leadership to the council as well as to some of our customers. And today, I am really excited to be joined by Deirdre Peters over at Lockheed. Deirdre, do you want to give yourself maybe a brief introduction?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deirdre Peters. I have been with Lockheed Martin almost 30 years. I'm primarily focused in cybersecurity. I've coordinated corporate internal audits, both international and domestic, evaluated cyber systems, put together risk frameworks, and adopted frameworks and policies to educate executives on cyber spend, IT spend, and as well as being able to do risk assessments. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, John.
Awesome. All right, before we get started, I know you just did a poll. We're going to fire off one more quick poll just to help dial in the conversation a little bit for today. So Jasmine, if you wouldn't mind firing off that first poll, just looking to get an understanding sort of where folks sit within their organization today. And folks, keep an eye on your chat, because I think that's where, Jasmine, keep me honest, I think the chat is where the poll is going to show up, right?
That's right. So it's launching right now.
There we go. Perfect. We'll just give this maybe 20, 30 seconds. Again, open your chat, and that's where you'll see your the poll question. There we go. Starting to see some responses. Others leading the charge. For those of you, I'm not sure that this was available on Polymarket. I don't know that they had a heads up about our poll question here. Okay, good mix. Finance, Deirdre, TBM office, couple people from your neck of the woods in cybersecurity, couple more generalist IT folks as well. So any thoughts on the poll here? It looks like a great mix for the conversation today, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great mix, great representation for us to share our background and going forward. Yeah, so thank you, John.
Awesome. Okay, so here's the agenda today. As the title indicates, we're really going to talk about demonstrating business value within cybersecurity investments. We're going to start today hearing a little bit about Lockheed's journey from Deirdre, and then we're going to transition and talk about sort of what you see here. We're going to talk a little bit about the headwinds and what's changing in the landscape from a cybersecurity perspective. We'll talk about how some of the best-in-class organizations can follow Lockheed's example, think about how to handle some of the increased scrutiny around some of these cybersecurity investments. We'll talk about some immediate actions that you folks can take going back into your organizations to make sure that you don't fall behind. And if we have a couple minutes, we'll try to answer just a couple of questions as well. So Deirdre, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just give us a little bit of background on sort of the journey from a Lockheed perspective over the last, as you mentioned, you've been there almost 30 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So full transparency, I started before vulnerabilities and Microsoft Patch Tuesdays even existed. We were still operating, still in a client server environment, but Active Directory wasn't a thing. Fast forward to the early 2000s, I began doing security risk assessments of our products and applications that we were looking to deploy across the enterprise. And at that time, we focused on defense in depth, where we wanted to ensure that everything was protected. We understood how it was going to operate. There was a log that was generated for us to be able to assess and evaluate if there was an incident moving forward. So those were the principles. And then as we gradually continued to adopt, we moved to single sign-on with Microsoft's ADFS and other technologies to enhance our overall security posture. We gradually started to build out our zero trust security framework. And that's basically ensuring that you as an entity understand how your employees, your AI agents are actually authenticating and accessing your environment. And is there traceability? Do you have guardrails around these technologies to ensure that you have insight to be able to go forth and meet your strategic goals and objectives.
Yeah, that's awesome, Deirdre. Couple things that you mentioned. The traceability. What was that journey like from the get-go? I guess how traceable, or TBM favorite word is like transparent. How traceable, transparent was that at the beginning, and what were some of the roadblocks that you ran into, or how did that improve over time?
Yeah, great question, John. From the beginning, a lot of our assessment was manual. It was leveraging, looking at the risk and being able to decipher, is this the right product or tool? Do we have the insight that we need? Is it traceable as it pertains to tying back to the life cycle of deployment to being in production and being able to understand how do you sustain this particular technology going forward? So again, most of it was manual. And then as applications and technologies evolved, we were able to migrate to more of intelligence, data-driven insight through dashboards, begin using Splunk and other monitoring tools to give us more insight.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Let's transition a little bit into what you're seeing today. What are some of the top trends sort of in 2020, 25, 2026? What are the things that are jumping out to you these days?
Oh, yeah. Well, AI is all of a buzz. I know we have proactive defense first, but realistically, AI, a lot of organizations are still trying to figure out how to leverage the generative AI, being able to take content and putting it into a specific platform and getting data returned back to you, leveraging the RAG model, for example. So that is a trend, and the risk around AI is different than the risk around cybersecurity in general, because there is the factor of human not being in the loop, the agents potentially being smart enough to be able to go off and do other things than it was intended to do as it was designed. So that is one of the top risks that I see from a proactive defense perspective. The zero trust adoption is also a risk because leaders and the C-suite don't always understand what the new technology is, what's this new emerging thing. And practitioners, those that are domain experts in the space, it's our responsibility to be able to translate a new technology into your organization's strategic goals. Why is it important for them to be able to spend and make an investment in this? And then as it pertains to risk and governance, regulatory from a ransomware perspective, that is definitely on the rise. So many institutions such as hospitals and universities have experienced this over the last few years. And then geopatriation with regard to workload shifting from you being in the United States to potentially being in Africa or Asia, for example. And then the last one with regard to the board level focus, I think that's important, is understanding what the goals and objectives are that impact your investors, you as a stakeholder and a shareholder.
Yeah, that's that makes a ton of sense with all the focus today. I think one of the things that you mentioned, especially on that zero trust adoption, that jumped out to me when you were talking about sort of like how to communicate value, how to talk about that like from a strategic goals perspective. And I think so many folks who have been working in the TBM space for quite some time can relate to that problem or that conversation, which is how do we take the value that IT is providing, or in this case, the value that cybersecurity is providing, and how do we elevate that to a board level conversation, to a C-suite conversation, so folks are really, understanding of the value that these, products and services and applications and platforms are delivering. So that makes a ton of sense. I think as well, like that's been such a challenge. Good news is, right? We partnered, ECI partnered with the TBM Council and the FAIR Institute on a new connected standard that actually links together cybersecurity and the taxonomy 5. We'll call it X, as there may be additional iterations coming along, right? There's a white paper that we released, the IRIS framework, which really focuses on some of what we'll talk about today, informing those risk investments and strategy. You'll be able to get a copy of that from the TBM Council website as well as our website, and that's really going to be some of the basis of the conversation today. So let's hop in. Like now that we understand sort of where things are going for 25, 26, we have this new reality. Let's talk a little bit about what the best in class organizations are doing to answer this challenge. So for the next, let's call it 10, 12 minutes or so, we'll talk about sort of 5 key different actions that we're seeing these organizations take. We'll talk a little bit about the different levels of maturity around transparency. We'll talk a little bit about how to avoid some of the common misconceptions about cybersecurity, how to communicate it more effectively. Deirdre mentioned that zero trust as an example. We'll talk about getting folks on board. This alignment of stakeholders, again, from a TBM perspective, folks have a track record of, how do we bridge IT, finance, the business? If you look at the poll question today, I think we had about 20% of people in the TBM office. We had some folks in finance, we had some folks in IT. So how do we get everybody on board and align those stakeholders? And then how do we position that business impact, again, at the C-suite level, or as Deirdre was just talking about at that board level as well. So let's hop in. Start with this balance of financial transparency. So there's going to be sort of 5 key levels here that we'll talk about, and then after this we'll fire off a poll question as well. The first one is just basic transparency and taxonomy alignment. So when we think about where best-in-class organizations are, they have a really clear picture, whether that's understanding their actual spend from a tower perspective, understanding the sub-tower components from a cybersecurity perspective, but then even getting into that taxonomy solution layer. So whether you're aligned with applications or products or services, capabilities, however you sort of define your own solutions internally, making sure that you've got good, clear transparency and visibility into what are those cost drivers that are driving those cybersecurity investments. That's really sort of step one. Let's call that not even, crawling. Let's just, a baby holding its head up, right? Like that's a good first place to start. As that evolves, we need to be thinking about the planning components as well, right? So oftentimes what we've seen with less mature organizations is they have a level of fidelity and granularity with their actual spend that is very different from how they're actually planning net new investments. And so making sure that the organization has that level of granularity and that level of fidelity around the planning process that is in line with this with their actuals process as well, right? So being able to plan at that granular level and having a transparency around the planning process. And that planning process could be rolling forecast, it could be, quarterly forecast, it could be the annual, the AOP process from a budgeting perspective, right? The next layer that's really important to talk about would be the quantification of risk. As we worked on this new connected standard, we partnered with the FAIR Institute, and they have an entire, framework and dialogue really around these different loss categories and being able to actually not just identify the types of risk that these cybersecurity investments are helping to solve for, but also how to help quantify that risk. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about some of the business cases. When we think about like mapping some of these capabilities and or outcomes, really critical to have an understanding, especially as folks are spending more and more from a cybersecurity perspective, making sure there's an understanding of what are the business outcomes, what are the strategic objectives that we are accomplishing, and how are these products and services helping us get there? Because if we understand that, we can understand maybe where some of that redundancy lies. And then finally, from a business case perspective, in doing research, we've seen business cases that spread the entire gamut from a perspective of how much or how little are they taking the quantification of risk into account from a cybersecurity perspective, right? So really making sure that the business cases that are being built can articulate the value, can quantify the risk, et cetera. So making sure that you're aligned from a TBM perspective, from an IT perspective, from a finance perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, making sure you're aligned to understand what are the asks from a business case perspective, and are we collectively providing the business or providing cybersecurity functions enough detail to create the business case that we need, right? So here, again, like sort of 5 key ways from a transparency perspective can really stay balanced with those cybersecurity commitments. So before we move on to the next one, Jasmine, if you wouldn't mind maybe launching our next poll question, trying to get an understanding of sort of how folks understand their capabilities and outcomes from a cybersecurity perspective. So, no accessible information available. It's out there, it's basic, but you got to know where to look, all the way to a very mature perspective where it's like hyper detailed and the organization has done a reasonable job. So let's take a look, if you wouldn't mind firing off that. Okay, let's see.
There it is. Can you see the poll?
Responses coming in. Yep, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. Trend here is if you know where to look. Yep. Which is not surprising. And so I think that's a big issue that we see folks running into quite often, which is if it's been done, if you have the keys to the kingdom, like maybe you have access to it. But when you think about your stakeholders, right, like Deirdre, as somebody in cybersecurity, right, like if you're having to hunt something down, like that's got to be super frustrating as opposed to it having readily available to help you build your business case for, you know, the office of the CFO, right? Okay, let's keep moving. Deirdre, how about communicating value? What have you seen to be effective? What pitfalls? Like, how do folks avoid misconceptions here?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with regard to communicating value is really understanding your culture, your organization. What are the goals and objectives that they're trying to execute on, both strategically, business wide, as well as IT. And I think the biggest challenge is nomenclature. Because you're into a space, you're a domain expert, you can't assume that an executive or someone else understands the language that you're speaking. That's something that I worked really hard to ensure that I'm able to translate the IT, technical, and cyber jargon so that a leader who understands numbers and finances and needs to understand if they're going to meet their bottom line understands why this is important. I've also seen that leaders think that zero trust is a product or a tool and it's not a service. It's really a mindset shift. It's a mindset shift. It's leaning in to adopting a different way of looking at your investments and your spend to holistically and comprehensively provide a cybersecurity framework for your organization. In addition to that, zero trust is definitely not an end state. It really is something that should be done cyclically. You should have a framework and a process in place that allows you to look at phase one from where you started. What does phase two look like? And if you've gotten to the point where you actually are executing and you can start to realize the benefits of making these cyber investments, there should be a process that you put into place to say, well, how often do we want to evaluate this? Technology is going to constantly change, as I mentioned, with the AI agents. And that's something that you also need to incorporate when you're looking at your zero trust model. The last item focuses on data quality and availability. If you don't have access to the data based on some of the responses, it makes it much more challenging for you to be able to determine what's your focus area, what is your source of truth that you're starting from. And then if your data is not available to you, that also is a risk that it impacts your organization's ability to go off and deliver their product or service to your customer. It impacts the return on investments to the shareholders and stakeholders, which you may also be one in that particular category.
Yeah, Deirdre, that's awesome. There's two things I wrote down that really resonated. One was you were sort of talking about sort of translating nomenclature, and I was thinking about like business capabilities or outcomes as being sort of a great way to have that translation back to a business concept, right? And then the other thing, that data quality, data availability perspective, I think, you know, for folks on the phone working in the TBM office, right, and you're thinking about understanding your business partners and your consumers, right? Deirdre is a perfect example of like, hey, this is somebody who would be consuming some of the output that we are generating as a TBM office perspective, right? Like making sure that you're vetting on a regular basis. Hey, from a cybersecurity perspective, are you getting the data that you need from us? Are you getting the reports that you need from us, right? So having that sort of relationship. And I guess on that topic, right, it's a great maybe transition into like what's valuable to one stakeholder, right? We've got some folks from the TBM office on the phone. We got some finance people. We got some IT people. We got some security people. Like, how do you close the gap here between these different security professionals? Or just
Yeah,
professionals in general, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Absolutely. So I'll start with, I think the biggest impact is again looking at your entire organization. Being Six Sigma Green Belt trained, I'm a big person on process. Put your as is, what's your to be, and have your stakeholders be actively a part of that exercise. Because if you don't get their buy-in and you just try to bring it to them as a product and say, we're going to do this, there's going to be resistance. I've seen that in numerous instances, but I've also worked hard to build relationships and try to really understand my stakeholders so that when I'm thinking about proposing a solution, it's taking that into consideration. I mean, it'll be conversational. You'll go back and forth. You'll understand their concerns, their pain points, and really be intentional about listening and understanding. While they may not be able to gain everything that they would like, at least you've made a concerted effort to lean in and listen to understand. I've already talked about aligning with the strategic goals and objectives. That's very important because stakeholders want to see what's in it for them, right? How can I benefit from what we're trying to do? And if it's not me directly, how does it impact the organization overall? The last one is definitely looking at risk and value. I can't stress enough the importance of doing some type of risk assessment, understanding your organization's risk appetite. What level of risk are you willing to accept? And then how are you going to manage that risk? Are you going to accept it? Are you going to mitigate it? Will you be able to still execute on your goals and objectives with that risk? And again, this all has to be cyclical. You won't just do this as a one-time thing. You should be thinking about how often do I need to look at this? Will you have a steering committee? Do you have a council? How will you ensure that the respective stakeholders are consistently engaged as you embark upon this zero trust?
Yeah, that last point, especially like the risk and value, again, just sort of thinking about clients and customers that I've worked with over the years, right? Like, how are you from a TBM office perspective, right? How are you providing that cost reporting? How are you providing that value reporting, right? What does the product and service provide? Not just what does it cost? What's the risk, right? If you've done that work from a fair institute perspective and started to quantify the risk, right? What does the risk look like? Is that information readily available to your consumers, like a Deirdre as an example, right? If that information is not available, or as we saw in that mapping, it's only available if you hunt it down and know where to look, that's not serving a purpose, right? So making sure that that's sort of first and foremost and front and center, I should say. We got a few minutes left. I think what we'll do here maybe is maybe we'll hit one of these examples and then we'll move on to questions. But I just sort of wanted to continue to elevate the conversation and think about when we're talking about business impact, and how are we translating some of the technical jargon up to sort of these executive or board level conversations. In working with clients, often find that the C-suite really can narrow down any given problem, statement, objective, strategic initiative into one of three buckets, right? Really, something has to either increase revenues, we have to be able to optimize OpEx, or we have to be able to reduce risk. And there's sort of an example for each one of these, but I think the one that traditionally we probably don't see from a cybersecurity perspective is around increased revenue. And so I actually want to talk about that particular example, and then maybe we'll see if we've got a couple minutes for questions. So let's talk about increasing revenue in like a real tangible example. I don't know about you folks. I think most of us on the phone, myself included, have relationships with multiple financial organizations, right? Consumers are more savvy than ever. There's all sorts of information out there about data hacks and fraud. It's running rampant. And customers are choosing to do business with organizations and institutions who are more secure than others, right? So let me give an example here. According to the CISA, it is best practice from a two-factor authentication perspective to use FIDO security keys as opposed to an email or an SMS, right? How many of those of us on the phone, you log into your mobile banking app, or you spend too much at the store and they want to verify it's you, and you get SMS, text message, or an email, or whatever the case is, right? Well, best practice is use a FIDO security key as opposed to SMS, right? Well, over time, if you're thinking like, hey, I've got relationships with 5, 6, 10 different financial institutions, maybe I'm approaching retirement, maybe I want to start narrowing down my relationships. As customers are more savvy, they're going to make investment decisions and business decisions based on that, right? So now we have a real world example for a financial institution to say, hey, if we invest in this new technology and if we adopt these FIDO security keys as opposed to sending our customers email, SMS, whatever the case is, we're going to have a leg up on the competition. And if this investment not only reduces risk, and this investment not only maybe lets us sunset a couple applications that we were using from an SMS perspective, but this also could potentially lead to increased revenues because customers could be choosing to do business with us instead of choosing to do business with our competitors. So again, we'll send the material out here at the end, but just based on time, maybe we'll see if there's a quick question we can answer. Jasmine or Deirdre, I don't know if you've had a chance to look through and see if there's an interesting one that's jumped out. I'm just looking through chat real quick. If anybody has a question, if you haven't put it in chat yet that you want to drop in, I think we've got time for a quick question.
I don't see any questions yet, so it's a great time. If you have a question, please put it in the chat.
Now let's see if anything comes through. We'll give it just maybe 30 seconds or so because I know we are pretty tight. Okay. I think we'll just sort of go back one here. Again, quick reminder, we had an opportunity to work with the TBM Council as well as the FAIR Institute. The IRIS framework is available. You folks can check that out on the TBM Council website. And again, tbmcouncil.org. For all your needs from a TBM Council perspective. This framework is up. The white paper is up. Our website as well. Additionally, for folks who are looking to get a little bit further along, we've got an assessment that we can run from an IRIS perspective to really ensure that that you are where you need to be as far as having that strategic visibility, being able to quantify risk, and making sure that those business cases that you're putting out there are in line with what organizations need to continue to approve them. So with that being said, thank you, Deirdre. Really appreciate you joining us and sharing some of your expertise over 30 years, or just about 30 years with Lockheed. Thanks again to the TBM Council for their continued support partnership. Hope everybody had tangible takeaways for today. Thank you to all of you who joined us. And the recording will be available on YouTube here shortly. So again, thanks everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.